They cut the power to my $850,000 lake cabin just 38 hours after I moved in while I was on a business call with investors. Standing at my door with a smirk that made my blood boil was Margot Livingston, the HOA president, who thought she could intimidate me into selling by any means necessary. What this power-hungry tyrant never expected was that I'd been a corporate attorney for 15 years and she just handed me the perfect case that would become her worst nightmare when the dust settled. Her reign would crumble and my counter lawsuit would make headlines across the country. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below because I'm about to show you how an HOA that shut off my cabin's power unknowingly faced their own $1 million downfall. A cabin at Silver Springs had been my dream for exactly 38 hours when everything went dark. After 5 exhausting years closing high-profile cases and saving for this peaceful retreat, I had finally purchased this lakefront property in Colorado. The real estate agent had emphasized the pristine views, the excellent fishing, and the tight-knit community. What she conveniently failed to mention was that this community was under the iron grip of Margot Livingston, a retired bank executive who ran the local homeowners association like her personal fiefdom. When I arrived with my legal documents, my work equipment, and my plans for a peaceful retreat, I had no idea I'd soon be using my legal expertise to battle someone who made the corporate raiders from my last case look like amateurs in the art of intimidation. That first evening I was setting up my home office when the cabin plunged into darkness. No warning, no flickering, just instant blackness and the suddenly loud sound of wind whistling across the lake. I checked my phone and confirmed I'd paid every utility bill. The account was active and in good standing. That's when the knock came at my door. Standing on my porch in the beam of my flashlight were 2 figures: a tall, imposing woman in her early 60s with perfectly styled silver hair, and beside her a younger woman in her 40s wearing what looked like an unnecessarily formal business suit for an evening house call. "Dr. Jackson," the woman said with a thin smile that never reached her eyes, "I'm Margot Livingston, president of the Silver Springs Homeowners Association. This is Patricia Wyatt, our association manager. We've had to temporarily suspend your electrical service due to violations of Section 8.3 regarding unauthorized modifications and electrical safety concerns." I was stunned. "You cut my power? On what authority?" Margot held up a document bearing the logo of the local utility company showing the HOA's right to request service suspension for safety reasons based on some special agreement with the power company. Patricia pointed at the small solar-powered security lights I had installed along my walkway. "Those devices aren't approved by the architectural committee at Silver Springs. We have specific lighting standards for all properties. Your equipment compromises the aesthetic guidelines of our community and violates Section 12.5 regarding exterior appearance standards." The condescension in her voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. Margot's smile widened slightly as she added, "Perhaps you should reconsider whether this property is the right fit for your lifestyle. If you're interested, I know several investors who would offer a fair market price." I tried explaining these were basic solar lights available at any hardware store, but Margot dismissed me with a wave of her hand. "In this community, we have strict standards for outdoor lighting to preserve our mountain aesthetic and minimize light pollution. We don't need homeowners installing whatever technology they fancy. It disrupts our carefully maintained ambience." Patricia handed me a business card for a real estate agent. "Give Jennifer a call. She can help you sell without losing too much on your investment." As they turned to leave, Margot added over her shoulder, "Until then, I suggest you familiarize yourself with the HOA bylaws, the full 375 pages. The threat was clear: comply or suffer." Later that night, as I sat in my cold cabin using my laptop's battery to review documents, I noticed a figure walking near the shoreline. When I stepped outside, she quickly approached a woman around my age with a friendly smile. "I'm Lisa Chen, your neighbor 2 cabins down," she said, extending her hand. "I saw what happened. Margot has been doing this for years." She explained how the HOA had pushed out 3 homeowners in the past year alone using similar tactics. "They'll hit you with a noise violation for that generator tomorrow, probably $3,000. Same as the Wilsons last year. It's all in Appendix F of their environmental regulations." Sure enough, the next morning I found a violation notice on my door citing noise pollution with exactly that fine amount referencing the same appendix Lisa had mentioned. I spent the day reviewing my purchase documents and HOA regulations, discovering numerous vague clauses that could be exploited against virtually any homeowner. My legal instincts kicked in and I began documenting everything. Every interaction, every notice, every conversation with neighbors. That evening Lisa stopped by again, this time with more troubling information. "They want your land specifically," she said, quietly glancing around as if Margot might be hiding in the trees. "Your cabin sits on a key location for some development project they're planning with Ridgeline Resorts." I remembered Margot's oddly eager offer to buy my property on the very first day. It was starting to make sense. That night I made a decision I wouldn't be intimidated into selling a property I'd worked years to afford. I'd spent my career fighting corporate bullies in courtrooms across the country. I wasn't about to become a victim of one. I called an old colleague from law school, Michael Chen here. I need your expertise on HOA law and possibly a new challenge. I think I found something that will make that Thompson case look like a parking ticket. As I hung up I glanced out toward the lake and caught sight of Margot standing near the shore watching my cabin through binoculars. Instead of feeling angry I picked up my phone and smiled. "Thank you for the first piece of evidence, Mrs. Livingston," I said to myself as I began recording. If this were a scene in a legal drama, the light from the lake right now would be the turning point for the main character. James Sullivan arrived at my cabin the next morning, his legal pad already filled with notes. After serving as a federal prosecutor, he'd built a reputation defending individuals against institutional overreach, exactly the expertise I needed. He examined my documents while I explained the situation. "They absolutely cannot legally cut your power," he confirmed, pointing to a passage in the utility company agreement. "This clause only applies to common areas and legitimate safety emergencies, not to private residences with minor aesthetic variations. They're using the HOA as an illegal intimidation tool. It's a classic tactic to force homeowners to sell." The more neighbors I interviewed, the clearer the pattern became. Anyone who didn't fit Margot's vision for Silver Springs, whether because of their profession, appearance, or willingness to question her authority, became a target. The tactics were always the same: fabricated violations, excessive fines, utility interruptions, and eventually pressure to sell, for the good of the community. I installed a temporary generator system to power my essential equipment, documenting every move the HOA made against me. When Patricia spotted my generator, she nearly tripped over herself rushing back to report to Margot. By that afternoon, an emergency HOA meeting had been called about the environmental hazard posed by my backup power equipment. Lisa introduced me to Kevin Reynolds, an environmental engineer who served on the HOA board but clearly wasn't in Margot's inner circle. Initially he was hesitant to speak with me. "I'm not getting involved in neighbor disputes," he said dismissively when we first met, but when I showed him the utility agreement explicitly prohibiting the actions Margot had taken, his demeanor changed instantly. "How did you get this?" he asked, suddenly alert. "I've been questioning the board's enforcement methods for months, but my concerns were dismissed. I was even threatened with removal when I pushed back against their last enforcement action." Kevin explained that he'd moved to Silver Springs specifically for its natural beauty, only to discover that Margot and her allies seemed determined to commercialize the area regardless of environmental impact. The conflict escalated rapidly. Margot called an emergency HOA meeting about the legal liability of my unauthorized power generation. A new regulation was hastily approved banning generators within the community without special permission, a rule clearly aimed specifically at me. When I attempted to request that permission the following day, I found myself surrounded by Margot's loyal HOA members who formed a literal human barrier preventing me from entering the community center. The intimidation tactics grew more brazen. I received an unexpected fire safety inspection notice from the county fire department, which coincidentally found numerous questionable violations in my perfectly safe cabin. A neighbor named Robert Jenkins, who had initially been friendly, suddenly began reporting that my security lights were blinding and keeping his children awake, a malicious lie that I later discovered earned him a promised position in the management of whatever development was being planned by Margot. Through it all I found myself wavering. One evening, sitting alone by the lake, I questioned whether this fight was worth it. Maybe I should just find somewhere else, I told James when he called to check on me. "Somewhere without an HOA?" His response was direct. "They're counting on you walking away. Every time someone leaves they get stronger. It's not just about your cabin anymore." He was right. Of course, I hadn't built my legal career by backing down when powerful people used intimidation tactics. Still, I hadn't come here looking for a fight. I'd been seeking peace, not another battle. The internal conflict weighed on me as heavily as Margot's external pressure. The situation reached a new level when I received an official notice that the HOA was suing me for endangering the community under Section 15.7 of their bylaws, demanding $250,000 in damages and my immediate departure from Silver Springs. James reviewed the lawsuit and smiled, actually smiled. "They just made 3 critical mistakes," he said. "First, Section 15.7 only applies to common areas, not private property. Second, by suing an attorney they've just legally given you access to all their internal communications. And third, their own bylaws require a full board vote for litigation, which meeting minutes show never happened." I set up my laptop camera and pressed record. "Let's call this case the HOA Queen and Her Crumbling Castle," I said. James laughed. "Lawsuits don't scare them. The truth behind those lawsuits is what terrifies them." While James prepared our legal counter-strategy, one launched into full investigative mode, digging into Margot's background and the history of Silver Springs HOA. What emerged was disturbing property values that mysteriously plummeted just before certain approved buyers purchased them, homeowners driven out through systematic harassment and increasingly strict regulations that seemed designed to give Margot near absolute control. James filed motions questioning the relationship between the assigned judge and Margot, discovering they had been country club members for years. Meanwhile, I interviewed former residents who had been forced to sell, building a powerful case documenting systematic harassment. Margot's response to my investigation was predictable but still shocking. While I was out interviewing a former resident, she organized a surprise inspection of my cabin, damaging some of my equipment in the process. What she didn't know was that Lisa had helped me install a sophisticated security system that captured everything, clear evidence of trespassing and property damage. James filed formal charges, forcing the reluctant local police to investigate despite their obvious ties to Margot's circle. Furious, Margot called a special HOA meeting to vote on my expulsion for disrupting community harmony. A vote that passed despite Kevin's passionate objection that no such power existed in the HOA charter. The pieces of the puzzle came together when I discovered the connection between Margot and Ridgeline Resorts through public documents. Her son was the company's director of acquisitions. Kevin, who had become an unlikely ally, accidentally encountered him at an environmental conference and overheard his phone conversation about securing the key location and closing the deal within 30 days. When James received notification that the judge had voluntarily recused himself from our case after evidence of his relationship with Margot was submitted, I knew we were gaining momentum. I prepared my legal documents into a comprehensive counterclaim, and James looked at me with newfound respect. "This is actually $1 million case," he said, "maybe more." The most surprising development came when Patricia called me late one night. "I need to meet with you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There are things you should know about Margot and Ridgeline. I'm not betraying anyone, but I'm not going to lose my license for her either." As I hung up, I couldn't help but feel that the case I had reluctantly begun was about to take a dramatic turn. The story wasn't just about saving my cabin anymore, it was about exposing a system of corruption that had been strangling this community for years. "The best cases find you," my old law professor used to say. This one had definitely found me by cutting my power on a cold Colorado night when I met Patricia at a diner 30 miles from Silver Springs. Her choice: "Margot has eyes everywhere." She explained she didn't fully switch sides but strategically revealed information to protect herself. "Ridgeline Resorts has been planning a $300 million luxury development for 18 months, she said, sliding a folder across the table. "They need to acquire all properties in the lakefront section to build their flagship resort." Inside were partial internal documents showing Margot receiving substantial consulting fees for each property acquisition, plus a promised executive position at the new resort upon completion. She threatened to have my real estate license revoked if I didn't help solve the Jackson problem. Patricia admitted, fear visible in her eyes. "I'm giving you enough to save myself, nothing more." Back at the cabin, I organized a small gathering for concerned homeowners, sharing my findings and evidence. The reaction was immediate. Shock followed by anger, then determination. Margot, feeling the community slipping from her control, hired a private security firm to monitor me 24/7 and dig for compromising information. Her smear campaign escalated, spreading rumors that I was planning to subdivide my property for low-income housing, a ridiculous accusation that nonetheless gained traction among some of the more conservative residents. The financial pressure was mounting too. Between legal costs and living without proper utilities, my savings were dwindling. One night I confessed to James that I needed to resolve this quickly. "I didn't expect to be fighting a legal battle when I bought this place," I admitted. Kevin discovered that Ridgeline's environmental impact reports had been falsified to conceal the development's true effect on the lake ecosystem. "Their own internal assessment shows it would devastate the water quality," he explained, showing me documents he'd obtained through professional contacts. "They're planning to dredge parts of the shoreline and fill in the wetlands that filter the water." As more homeowners began openly supporting my investigation, the community divided sharply. Robert Jenkins led a group of Margot loyalists in a protest outside my cabin. My security cameras caught them receiving cash payments from Margot's car, evidence that would prove invaluable later. The escalation continued relentlessly. James filed for a restraining order against Margot after documenting multiple instances of harassment. In response, Margot lobbied county officials to declare my cabin a public nuisance. The local newspaper began covering the conflict, initially portraying me as a troublemaking outsider disrupting a peaceful community. The negative press nearly broke my resolve. "Maybe this isn't worth it," I told Lisa one evening as we watched another sunset from my powerless cabin. "Even if I win, half the community will hate me." She pointed to the children playing by the shore. "If Ridgeline builds here, none of this will exist anymore. It won't be a matter of who likes you. There won't be a community left at all. Everything changed when a former Ridgeline employee contacted me through my legal website. I was fired for questioning ethical practices. She explained providing internal emails that explicitly outlined the plan to use the HOA to pressure homeowners into selling with a deadline of just 30 days to finalize the remaining properties. James immediately finalized our $1 million countersuit against both the HOA and Margot, personally charging harassment, property damage, conspiracy to defraud, and racketeering under state law. The local bar association opened an ethics investigation, providing additional legal support, significantly strengthening my position. Sensing the walls closing in, Margot made an unexpected visit to my cabin with a final offer triple the market value for my property in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement. I invited her in ostensibly to discuss terms, but with security cameras rolling. "You know, Mrs. Livingston," I said casually as she detailed her offer, "the defendants in my biggest cases often dig their own graves. Thank you for contributing this valuable evidence." Her face froze when she realized she was being recorded. "You won't win against me," she spat, losing her composed facade. "I built this place. I have all of them in my pocket." The footage was priceless, Margot in her own words admitting to corrupting local officials as she stormed out. I knew we had reached a turning point. The legal case wasn't just documenting the conflict anymore, it had become a weapon in the fight itself. The most disturbing discovery came when investigating Margot's finances. Not only had she received kickbacks from Ridgeline, but she had been embezzling from the HOA fund for years, using the money to renovate her own mansion and fund luxury vacations. When James filed our formal countersuit with all the evidence we'd gathered, it created a statewide sensation. Ridgeline Resorts, fearing the growing scandal, issued a statement denying any improper activities with the HOA. My legal brief about the situation was picked up by major news outlets, quickly making headlines across the state. Homeowners called an emergency meeting about Margot's use of their funds for her personal legal battle, creating yet another front in her rapidly collapsing defense. Margot tried desperately to discredit the evidence, claiming everything was fabricated and that Patricia had betrayed the community. Patricia, feeling threatened, continued providing information piecemeal to secure her position. Kevin organized a group of environmental scientists to oppose the development, drawing additional media attention. Lisa discovered Margot secretly contacting a cybersecurity company to attack my online accounts, a desperate move that showed just how cornered she felt. Some newspapers began attacking me, calling me a professional troublemaker seeking attention and a disgruntled homeowner, making me worry that I might lose the public relations battle. Despite having truth on my side, the situation reached critical mass when a cybersecurity team attacked my email and cloud storage accounts, attempting to delete evidence. Fortunately, I had anticipated such a move and maintained secure backups, even tracking the attack to its source. Margot attempted to lobby county officials to intervene in the case, but the media attention had grown too intense. At the preliminary hearing, Margot arrived with an expensive legal team projecting absolute confidence, while James and I appeared with just our evidence and determination. Outside the courthouse, media had gathered, with some reporters calling me an opportunist and an attention-seeking outsider. It was exactly the kind of David versus Goliath moment that makes for compelling legal drama. Except I was living it rather than watching it from a safe distance. The preliminary hearing began with Margot demonstrating complete confidence, unaware that we were about to play our trump card. After her lawyer's opening statement painting me as a troublemaker trying to gain fame by disrupting a peaceful community, James calmly approached the bench. "Your Honor, before we continue, I'd like to submit evidence that was just made available to us." He played an audio recording of a meeting between Margot and Ridgeline representatives discussing how to push out remaining homeowners within 30 days to secure the missing parcels. The courtroom fell silent. Patricia, who had been subpoenaed, confirmed the recording's authenticity, causing Margot to visibly pale. I looked directly at her across the courtroom. "This is exactly what happens in every case I take," I said quietly, "the moment when the truth becomes undeniable." As Margot left the courthouse, she faced a crowd of angry residents and reporters. Turning to me, she hissed, "You have no idea what you've started. I still have cards to play." I smiled at the security camera footage I was holding. "I think it's time to show Mrs. Livingston the sentencing phase." The judge ordered a full investigation into the HOA's financial activities and suspended all actions against my property pending resolution of our countersuit. That evening, local television stations led with the story, the narrative having completely flipped from troublemaking homeowner to local hero exposing corruption. It was surreal watching myself become a character in what felt increasingly like one of the legal dramas I'd always dismissed as unrealistic. The following days brought dramatic developments. Ridgeline Resorts officially withdrew from the development project and terminated all connections with Margot to salvage their corporate image. The HOA held an emergency meeting where numerous members demanded Margot's immediate resignation. The State Financial Investigation Agency opened an inquiry into Margot's management of HOA funds over the past 5 years. Through it all, I continued gathering evidence documenting the HOA's collapse and restructuring under new leadership. Margot, desperate to shift blame, attempted to make Patricia and other allies scapegoats, creating even more division among her remaining supporters. Patricia continued providing information piecemeal about past illegal transactions to secure her partial immunity deal. Kevin was nominated as interim HOA president, pledging comprehensive reform and transparency. This placed me in a difficult position should I pursue the lawsuit to its conclusion, potentially bankrupting the HOA that served the very community I'd come to care about, or accept a settlement that would benefit everyone. The question tormented me, especially given my own financial pressures. The settlement would clear my debts and fund my next phase of life. I admitted to James one evening as we reviewed our strategy, but if I sign their NDA, the full story never gets told. He understood my dilemma but reminded me, this isn't just about your cabin anymore. It's about stopping this from happening elsewhere. Margot's desperation became increasingly evident. She attempted to destroy evidence by shredding HOA documents, but Lisa caught her in the act and recorded it at the next court session. All evidence regarding HOA finances and their relationship with Ridgeline was made public, creating a wave of indignation throughout the community. Margot's lawyers proposed a settlement, but with the condition that I sign an NDA and drop all claims. It was a tempting offer, financially enough money to clear my debts and secure my future, but accepting would mean the full story would never reach the public and the pattern could continue elsewhere with different players. After a sleepless night weighing my options, I made my decision. Standing before the court, I declined the settlement offer. Money can buy silence, but it can't buy justice. I told the judge, I didn't file this case for money. I filed it to expose the truth. Margot, in a final desperate move, organized a press conference accusing me of fabricating the entire story for personal gain. What she didn't know was that I had prepared for this, releasing new evidence just as she was speaking, causing reporters to check their phones and murmur among themselves. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. In the middle of her denials, law enforcement officers appeared with a warrant for Margot's arrest on charges of embezzlement of HOA funds and financial fraud. As Margot was led away in handcuffs, she stumbled frantically, trying to push cameras away from her face. The contrast with her previously immaculate, controlled image couldn't have been more stark. I watched the scene unfold, my own phone capturing every moment. I've won many cases in my career, I said quietly to Lisa, who stood beside me, but I've never seen justice happen in real time like this. I should thank her for cutting my power and giving me the opening argument and the closing statement. James smiled, watching the officers place Margot in the police car. We have our verdict now. I lifted my phone to capture the final moments, and I have the best legal precedent I've ever set. The aftermath unfolded rapidly. The court ruled overwhelmingly in favor of the homeowners, awarding $1.2 million in damages from Margot's personal assets. The local news, which had initially portrayed me as the villain, now celebrated the attorney who saved Silver Springs. Patricia, with her partial immunity deal, began a new life in another state, still carrying the guilt of her complicity. Kevin faced challenges from conservative residents resistant to change, but his environmental expertise and clear vision for community protection gradually won over even the skeptics. As for me, I found myself at a crossroads, with numerous offers from prestigious law firms interested in my expertise in HOA law. With the court case concluded and my cabin's power finally restored, I could have simply returned to my original plan, finding peace and inspiration for my next career phase, but the experience had changed me. Using part of the settlement money, I established a foundation to help homeowners abused by predatory HOAs across the country. The lawsuit, Jackson vs. Silver Springs HOA, became required reading in property law classes at several universities, sparking discussions about HOA reform in state legislatures. Former residents who had been driven out held a reunion at my cabin, planting trees and rebuilding the community dock as a symbol of healing. Through it all, I kept detailed records documenting not just the conflict but the reconciliation that followed. Margot's criminal trial concluded with a guilty verdict on multiple counts of embezzlement, fraud, and abuse of power. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison and ordered to pay restitution to all affected homeowners. Her final statement to the court showed no remorse, only bitterness. I dedicated my life to maintaining standards and excellence at Silver Springs, she insisted. Everything I did was for the good of the community. The judge was unmoved, noting that the evidence showed her actions were motivated by personal gain and a disturbing desire for control over others. As she was led away for the last time, our eyes met briefly. There was no triumph in my heart, only a lawyer's curiosity about how someone could become so corrupted by power and so blind to their own transformation into the villain of the story. Kevin faced significant challenges in rebuilding community trust. Some conservative residents remained skeptical of his leadership, viewing his environmental priorities with suspicion. I attended a remarkable town hall meeting where he patiently addressed concerns from Margot's former supporters, gradually winning them over with his transparency and willingness to listen. "We don't have to agree on everything," he told an older resident who had voiced concerns about changing too much too quickly, "but we do have to respect each other's right to be heard. That's the difference between before and now." Watching him navigate these difficult conversations with grace showed me that the story's third act, the healing after the conflict, was perhaps the most important part to witness. My own path forward became clear as the case gained recognition. I received numerous offers from firms interested in my expertise, including several wanting me to lead their HOA litigation departments. Instead, I chose to focus on a larger initiative examining HOA abuses nationwide, using the foundation to support homeowners willing to stand up against intimidation. The cabin that had been the center of so much conflict became both my home and a legal retreat where other attorneys could work and find inspiration. The solar power system that had so offended Margot now powered a legal aid office where young lawyers could develop cases focused on homeowner rights and environmental justice. The most unexpected resolution came when several state legislators, prompted by the attention my case had generated, began drafting homeowner protection acts to limit HOA powers and require greater transparency. I was invited to testify before committee hearings, sharing the evidence we'd gathered about how unchecked HOA authority could lead to systemic abuse. One senator remarked during a hearing, "Sometimes it takes one person with legal expertise to show us what's been happening right under our noses." The idea that my work might lead to lasting structural change was more satisfying than any verdict I had ever won. 1 year after Margot's arrest, Kevin organized the first Silver Springs Community Festival, celebrating the area's renewal with music, food, and educational workshops about environmental conservation. I was honored as a special guest, though I felt somewhat uncomfortable with the attention. "I didn't fix anything," I told the gathered residents. "I just used the law as it was intended. You all did the hard work of rebuilding." Later that evening, as families gathered for a lakeside concert, I received an email from a homeowner in Arizona inviting me to investigate their HOA's suspicious activities, a potential sequel that would have to wait for another day. Each evening as I sit on my small dock watching the sun set over the peaceful lake, I can't help but reflect on the journey that brought me here. I bought this cabin seeking tranquility, only to find myself in the middle of a battle, but perhaps that's what I needed, not just for myself but for this community. Sometimes the most beautiful homes are built from the ruins, and the strongest communities emerge when people stand up for what's right. If this were a scene in a legal drama, the light on the lake right now would be the perfect final image, the visual resolution to a complex story. Margot cut my power, but she inadvertently switched on a much greater light, and with over a dozen states now considering new HOA regulations based on my case, I'm eager to see what changes come next. Special thanks to all of you who stood with me on this journey, and Mrs. Livingston, if you're watching this from prison, thank you for cutting my power. It was the smartest decision you ever made for my career.